The devices we use every day are just engineering marvels. They pack this incredible amount of power into spaces that are getting smaller and smaller. But there's always a battle going on inside. It's the need for massive performance versus the demand for a battery that lasts all day. And that is the fundamental challenge of pretty much every chip design today. So, how do they do it? How do engineers win this war for every single watt of power? Well, the answer lies with a team of unsung heroes, a group of highly specialized special agents working deep inside the silicon. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? You just flip a switch and turn part of the chip off. But in reality, it's one of the trickiest things to get right in modern chip design. Because when you cut power to one section of a complex system on a chip, an SoC, you risk unleashing absolute chaos on all the other parts that are still running. So really, how do they pull it off? Well, the moment a section of the chip goes dark, three huge problems pop up almost instantly. You get voltage mismatches between the parts that are on and the parts that are off. You get these rogue signals that are just left floating in a totally unknown state. And of course, any important data that was in that section just vanishes. These are really the villains of our story. And to defeat them, engineers deploy a whole team of specialized cells. So let's meet the first agent on the case. Okay, our first special agent is basically the diplomat of the group, the translator. This is the level shifter. Its whole job is to manage the conversations between different power domains. That is, parts of the chip that might be running at different voltages or, a section that's about to be shut down completely. The best way to think about it is like a language translator. Imagine a signal from a low voltage area trying to talk to a high voltage area. Its message, well, it's basically a whisper. It's too quiet to be understood correctly. A level shifter steps in and makes sure that the message is spoken at the right volume, which prevents all sorts of failures and keeps the signals clean. And this translation, it has to work both ways. A low to high, or L2H, shifter boosts that quiet signal so it can be properly read by a higher voltage block. But on the flip side, you have the high to low, or H2L shifter, which steps the signal down. And this is absolutely critical, because if you send a signal with too much voltage into a low voltage area, you can literally fry the delicate transistors in there. And if you look at this classic L2H design, it's really, really clever. It uses this specific arrangement of transistors that creates a kind of seesaw effect. The whole idea is a weak pull-up, strong pull-down strategy. And what that means is that even a very faint, low-voltage signal has enough juice to quickly and cleanly trigger a proper high-voltage output. It's just a really elegant solution to a very tricky problem. Now, the H2L shifter is usually a lot simpler, like this back-to-back inverter design you see here. And you might be thinking, do you always need one? Well, if the voltage drop is tiny, maybe not. But when the difference is significant, this little cell is absolutely mandatory to prevent that overvoltage stress and to protect the chip's long-term health. All right, next up on the team is the security guard, the enforcer. Meet the isolation cell. Its entire mission is to prevent total chaos when a power domain suddenly shuts down and all its signals go rogue. See, when a block of logic powers off, its outputs don't just go to a nice clean zero. They float. They could be anything. And this creates a ton of electrical noise and confusion for the active parts of the chip. It can cause huge power leaks or even make the whole system fail. The isolation cell is like a bouncer at a club. It grabs that unpredictable signal and forces it into a known, safe state. No funny business allowed. And this diagram just shows you perfectly how it works. Look here. When the main power signal goes low, a separate isolation signal, ISO, kicks in and goes high. This activates the isolation cell. In this case, it's just a simple logic gate, and it basically intercepts that messy floating signal from the powered down block and clamps the output, protecting its active neighbor from getting a stream of pure gibberish. And designers have a few different plays they can run to enforce this order. They can choose to clamp the signal to a solid logic 0 or a logic 1, or they can even use what's called a keeper type, which cleverly holds on to the last valid signal right before the power was cut. The most important thing is you can never, ever let that signal just float freely. Okay, so our third agent is the scribe, the memory keeper of the whole operation. This is the retention cell. Its job is to remember critical information so that a block of logic doesn't get amnesia every single time it wakes up. Think about it. Without these, every time a part of the chip powered back on, it would be a total blank slate. It would have to go through this long, really power-hungry process to get reinitialized. Retention cells stop that from happening. They're like a tiny notepad that saves the most important settings just before the lights go out.
So these cells are built around something called a flip-flop, which is just a basic way to store one bit of memory in a circuit. And as you can see here, there are a couple of ways to build that little notepad. The single pin design on the left, it integrates a tiny shadow latch right into the main flip-flop, which makes it really compact. The balloon latch on the right uses a whole separate structure, which can give designers a bit more flexibility.
But wait, how does the notepad stay powered when everything around it is turned off? Well, that is the secret. That little shadow latch is connected to a completely separate, always-on power supply. It's this tiny little lifeline that keeps that critical piece of memory alive while the main block is asleep. And that sets the stage perfectly for our final and maybe most important team member. So we have all these agents, but who's giving the orders? Who's running the show? I mean, every special ops team needs a commander, a mission control working behind the scenes. And in the world of chip design, that's the always-on or AON logic. Here's the paradox of this whole thing. Think about it for a second. You actually need to use powered logic to manage turning the power off. The control signals for the isolation cells, for the retention cells, for the power switches themselves, they can't just shut down with everything else. That's where AON cells come in. They are the logic that never, ever sleeps. And this diagram just reveals how ridiculously clever this whole setup is. Look at the AON buffers, the ones in black here. They are physically located inside the switchable power domain, right there with all the components that are about to be turned off. But, and this is the key, they're wired to that separate, always-on power supply. This allows them to control the whole power-down sequence from behind enemy lines, so to speak. So, as you can probably tell by now, these aren't just individual components doing their own thing. They are a highly coordinated team. Each one of these special agents has a very specific role, and they have to work in perfect sequence to pull off the mission of saving power without causing the whole chip to crash. And this is the playbook. Just before a power down, the always-on logic signals the retention cells to save their state. Then, it activates the isolation cells to secure all the outputs, and only then does the AO1 logic actually cut the power. When it's time to wake up, it just runs the sequence perfectly in reverse. Power comes back, isolation is removed, and the saved state gets loaded back in. It's just a beautifully choreographed dance happening millions of times a second. So the really crucial thing to take away from all this is that low-power design isn't a passive thing. It's not just about turning stuff off. It is an incredibly active and sophisticated system of management, run by these amazing special agents, all working together to keep our devices both incredibly powerful and incredibly efficient. And this all brings us to the future, right? As we demand more and more from smaller and smaller devices, AI running on our phones, complex sensors everywhere, this battle for every last microwatt of power is only going to get more intense. It really makes you wonder, what new kinds of special agents will engineers have to invent for the next generation of chip design?